What is up, and welcome back to 24 Minutes of the Oscars, the podcast that takes a look at the 2023 Oscars 24 minutes at a time. I'm Ethan Simi.
And I'm Ben Lawhorn. This week on the pod, we are hanging out with young Sammy Fabelman as he aspires to be a filmmaker and explores the power of cinema in Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans.
Growing up in a post-World War II era Arizona, young Sammy Fabelman aspires to become a filmmaker as he reaches adolescence, but soon discovers a shattering family secret and explores how the power of films can help him see the truth. Ben, we are now in week 2 of the Oscars, dude. We are 1 week closer to the Oscars, which is very exciting. I'm stoked. This is we have about 8 weeks to go until the Oscars on biggest night in Hollywood, March 12th. That's what we're marching towards here. This is a big episode of the pod because this is our very first non-A24 project that we are covering. How do you feel?
It is, isn't it? Yeah, I really thought about that. Yeah, this is kind of weird. This is our first, not under the umbrella of A24. But I think if there's a director that we can make the exception for, we could definitely start out with Steven Spielberg. The dude's got a couple good ones under his belt, so we can make the exception for him.
Yeah, a real up-and-comer. And joining us, if you're watching on YouTube, you already know we have a guest joining us. We are going to be having a new guest with us every single week for the next 8 weeks until the Oscars happen. And let's just say we have some really exciting people lined up. We're very, very excited about who's going to be coming on the pod. But tonight, fellow film connoisseur Matthew Scott is joining us to talk about The Fabelmans. Matt, how are you doing, dude? Welcome to the pod.
Ethan, Ben, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very stoked to have you here, man. This is going to be fun.
Yeah,
I would have dressed up if I knew we were going to be visual. So thanks for that last minute wardrobe change.
I mean, it's funny. Like I hadn't really thought about it. Like I've way too many movie shirts, and I was going through my closet, and I had this Pulp Fiction one on today, and I was like, I don't need Spielberg things. And then right as we started recording, I was like, I have like fucking 3 Jaws shirts, and I just didn't. I was like, nope, I don't know if this falls under, but I think we all look good. This is beautiful for YouTube. This is another big episode of the pod. This is gonna be a lot of fun. This film was distributed by Universal Pictures, produced by Amblin Entertainment, which is Spielberg's own production company. Stars Michelle Williams. I'm excited to hear what you guys think about her performance. I think it's definitely the most eccentric of the film, to say the least, but understanding the character that she had to, fill the shoes of, that makes sense. Paul Dano, Seth Rogan, Gabriel LaBelle, and Judd Hirsch, with the script co-written by Spielberg himself and the revered Tony Kushner, who we worked with on a few things, but most recently West Side Story, right? They did the remake together, I believe.
Mm-hmm. They did. Yeah. And Tony Kushner also penned Andor, I believe. Or, Andor. I believe so.
I think it was Tony Gilroy, who wrote Michael
Another
Clayton,
Tony.
Which is a fucking great movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch
There we
Michael
go.
Clayton.
Circle back. Look at that. You're making up for my losses.
The Tonys. Talking about the Tonys on the Oscars.
Big Oscars pod, Matt, we like to start each of these Oscars shows by kind of gauging how our guest feels about the Oscars. We've obviously asked you to be here, and you care enough about the Oscars to commit 2.5 hours of your life to watching a film and then commit another hour to recording a podcast with us. So we appreciate that, and we're very excited to have a conversation. But how do you feel about the Oscars? When did you start watching? Do you even care about the Oscars?
Ever since I can remember, the Oscars were very similar to the Super Bowl in my household. And I don't mean that with snacks, but I definitely mean that we lined up, we watched the red carpet. So as a kid, it was something that was always on long before my love of movies actually matured. Now, as I've come into adulthood, and Ethan will know this, but I'm a very avid consumer of literature, and I'm in the process of reading this is not a humble brag. It sounds like it, but it's not.
Oh, it is.
I'm in the process
sure
of reading Pulitzer Prize winning novels from history. Cool. So to me, the Oscars offer a very similar reverence in that this is the artists that create movies basically picking what they believe to be the highest form of art in every category each year. And for better or worse, and have your own opinions, but at the end of the day, that does get etched on that little, gold statuette. So I think that it deserves a very important, it deserves the attention that it gets.
I think it's a really interesting comparison that I honestly never hear. Like, I think we always hear Oscars with like the Emmys or the Globes or other film things or the Tonys, but I never hear the same. Like it is like it's the Pulitzer of films, basically. Like, this Best Picture. Like that's really kind of cool. And it's an interesting way to kind of like this little moment in time of like why did this movie win, at this point or whatever. Probably a lot less influence from Harvey Weinstein in the Pulitzer races, but who knows who knows why some of these movies won. But no, it's super interesting. I honestly don't think I've ever gotten that, like, put that comparison together, but it totally makes sense. That's a cool thing to be doing for sure.
A little less glitz. There's no red carpet, I don't think, at the actual Pulitzers. And they're not televised. So yes, a little bit less traction, but all the same, it is
kind of those writers just like being in their cave, right? Like they don't want to come walking out or anything. Like, leave me alone.
Hey, when Best Adapted Screenplay, look at those guys, because a lot of those are the authors of some of these novels. So
that's very true. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. That's a great humble brag, Matt. Very well done. And I appreciate that you did it in the very beginning of the podcast to make sure you rope people in to your literature knowledge. The lit guy. Ben, I do have a question for you. We stated last week our excitement for the Oscars. We both care. It means nothing, and it's a waste of time, but we care deeply. I do want to know, though, I'm curious, how do you feel now that we've kind of dedicated the pod to the Oscars? We have 8 weeks to go. We're talking about the Oscars every single week. You and I are texting about the Oscars every day.
Yeah.
Do you like the hype more, or do you like the show more? Because I think I'm kind of in the camp of the hype. I like the buildup. I like the speculation and the races and seeing everything leading up to it. Of course, I like the Oscars, but not as much as the hype. Yeah. Do you fall on a line, or do you like both?
I think it is a lot of the hype, and the buildup is just so much fun. It's interesting because I was just talking today about of all things pro wrestling, and there is like the behind the scenes aspect of it, of like who has like contract disputes or whatever, that kind of a thing, and then however they choose to portray that on the actual show itself. And it's almost more fun to kind of know, like, all right, here's what's going on behind the scenes. How is this going to play out? And I think it's a lot of what the Oscars is, especially, like when Parasite won, like, I know Bong's like interviewing well, people like hanging out with him, but is this going to like correlate to him winning, or is this going to go more traditional? And there are those aspects to it. With a lot of that kind of came up with Clayton, I think, where it's people vote on who they want to hear give a speech, or who they just like hanging out with sometimes. And I can't fault them for that. So it's fun to kind of take that stuff into perspective here. Cause as much as I think like hands down, Michelle Yeoh should win Best Actress, it's like, I don't know, Cate Blanchett gave a great performance, and I don't know how well she's like gonna, push for this. So I don't know. It's kind of fun, the build up.
I do think it's interesting too. And I think that's part of what I like so much is that, like, what studio is going to get behind what movie, right? Like how are they going to choose what is the one, what's the chosen child of the season? I think is always very interesting. Of course, we're going to get into some other Oscar categories here at the end of the show, very similar to what we did last week. We'll kind of review the movie. We'll talk about true cinema, and then we'll talk about some other Oscar predictions for the Fabelmans outside of Best Picture. We're definitely going to be talking about Best Director. We're definitely going to be talking about Best Original Screenplay. Matt, you mentioned that and brought that up. The Fabelmans will absolutely be contending in those areas, if not potentially winning them. We'll kind of hash it out and see. I want to start with Matt, though. We're going to do some general reviews because none of us have talked about the Fabelmans together. And I'm genuinely curious where this falls on everybody's list. Matt, what did you think of the Fabelmans?
I loved it. That's a pretty easy word to kick around when you've got such an amazing director that's basically putting his life on film and has been trying to put emotion in his films for his entire career. And this one, the parallels that I saw the most, and not in subject matter, but really in, again, the love and the warmth behind the lens, is one of his coldest movies, actually, which was Schindler's List. Yeah. But I think that especially hits hardest when he's able to put aspects of his religion up front and really in your face in the camera. I thought that throughout this entire film, I was constantly smiling. I was emotionally moved, and it didn't glitz or glam over a lot of the nuances. I mean, we don't get to Hollywood until the very end. And even then, it's not like we were just talking about the Oscars. It's not red carpet. It's not flashing light bulbs. It's not celebrities. it is gritty, and it's what Sam's worked for, or Sammy, which he'll correct the entire film. Love that little tidbit.
Yeah.
I was overall very invested, and we'll talk about individual scenes later, but I think the last 2 minutes of that film were some of the best in cinema that I've seen in a long, long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a super solid point. Yeah, it's like, I mean, what do you say? Like, we joke about it, but like, it's Spielberg and he's telling his story. Like,
right,
he wasn't gonna mess this up. Like, it's like this guy's been working literally his entire life for this film. Like, it is all led up to this, and he knew he couldn't do it until his parents passed, so he could tell like the full story without any concern for that kind of stuff. And I think he was able to give it the respect it deserves. Like one of I'm not as avid of a reader, but my favorite thing to read is biographies. Like, I love learning how people came up. Like right now, I'm in the middle for a long time now of this like Walt Disney biography. I've just been reading it forever, but it's kind of cool to see how he starts out like just like drawing little cartoons or whatever in the military. Then it turns into owning Marvel and Star Wars and stuff. It's like, man, it's crazy how this like all, panned out. And it's so fun to kind of see someone like Spielberg tell his own story of how he remembers. And obviously there's like a little bit of a cinematic give and take here, like with what is super accurate, but it's fun to see him tell his story that way, from the train, like from in the movie theater to the actual train set, and then all the stuff with his parents, which is obviously a huge deal. But I was talking to one of my co-hosts on the other podcast, just like, man, Scouts would have been so much more fun if I could just make movies all the time. Like, his Scout stuff looked so rad. So yeah, it's something that just felt like a slam dunk since it got announced. It's like, okay, Spielberg's going to tell his story, give it the Oscar. You know what I mean? Like, someone asked me earlier last year, I guess now 2022, like, what's going to happen to the Oscars? I'm like, I don't know, but I don't know how Fabelmans isn't just winning a bunch. When you put it down on paper, it's like one of the best directors of all time telling his story. The Academy loves a biopic, It's just like, it seems like it's all right there. I don't know how this isn't just going to take so much stuff. So I'm curious to see how it all pans out. But for the movie itself, I loved it. I thought it was great.
That's a perfect segue to my question. Are we underrating the Fabelmans? I know I haven't given my general review, and I will, but are we underrating the Fabelmans? Because Clayton came on here a couple weeks ago and literally said, at the end of the day, we're wringing our wrists over Tar and Banshees and all these other movies and Top Gun Maverick. Is it really just going to be the Fabelmans at the end of the day? Because it's Spielberg telling his story with Michelle Williams and Paul Dano playing America's dad, and an incredible debut performance from Gabriel LaBelle that just absolutely eats up the emotions that are on the screen. And I don't know. I am genuinely curious in this Oscar race if this movie will kind of be the come from behind of like, we should have seen it coming and everybody knew it was going to happen, but apparently nobody wanted to believe it situation. Ben, Matt, do you guys think we're underrating this? Especially, we're going to talk about Clayton's power rankings later. We're going to be doing this every week on the pod. Yeah. It is currently number 2, which is pretty high, but I guess I watched it for a second time, and I guess I just don't know how we're not like, that's it. That's the one. Wrap it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the one thing he said that really sticks with me is that everyone's fighting about what is number 2. Yeah. Like, if you're fighting about what's number 2, then there isn't a number 2. It's just like, there's number 1 Fabelmans, and then there's everything else. Like, if there's not a clear cut number 2, then it's not really up against anything in particular. It's just like up against the field. And obviously, like with the ranked voting and all that kind of stuff, like, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But yeah, it's just like, it's like, I don't know, it's the guy who did Jurassic Park and Schindler's List the same year. Like, you're not going to be like, man, Spielberg really pulled it off. It's like, fucking, of course he did, man. Like, all he does is pull stuff off. So that's why we're not sitting here like always talking about Fabelmans. It's like, yeah, Spielberg told the story. It's a fucking amazing movie. But what maybe might beat it? It's like, I don't know. Let's talk about Banshees. Let's talk about Tar. Like, when the argument is like, what might beat you, then I think you're the clear number 1.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about power rankings later, and I'm not trying to spoil that. Matt, how do you feel about this situation here?
I feel almost exactly the same way. If we are constantly using a different film as a reference point to provide the reason for the ranking, you're the rule, not the exception from it.
Yeah.
And I am a very harsh judge of art, and I went in with very high expectations, and they were exceeded. So not that I get a vote, not that I'm secretly.
You sure the Academy
I'm
hasn't called
part of
you
the
up and
motion
is like,
picture.
look, Matt, we gotta have you vote.
My suit's under this hoodie and this beanie somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm hiding a black suit. But yeah, I agree. Without pulling the cart before the horse, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, I know how you feel. Ready Player One. How are we doing on Ready Player One around here? This is my one chance to talk about it on a podcast that I have. Matt, pro or anti Ready Player One, the Steven Spielberg film?
I'm ready for this.
I was going to say, because the book was fantastic. Hey, the book was really great. As a nerdy kid, I really liked it. The book is better. That cliche, the book is better. I still enjoyed the movie. It's a little bit of that like CGI, just like explosion running down your face. Like it was slammed in your face. But overall, I think he did a great job with it. Spielberg, I mean.
Yeah.
For sure.
Ben, you're pro, right?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with what I think 99% of it always applies to the book is better. Like there are very rare occurrences where the movie is better. But yeah, this also falls into that where like the book was obviously better. And I know we've probably talked about it before, but for me, Spielberg was the perfect and the worst director for this because like he made a great movie. He told it really well, but he was just like, I don't want to put my stuff in it. It's like, dude, you were the 80s, man. Like don't take out all like the E.T. and Jurassic Park references. Like that's part of what we loved about the book. But you're like, I don't know. I don't want to be too egotistical. I'll take my stuff out. Like, don't do that. Like we want to see you mess with your own stuff. Like that would have been amazing. We didn't really get to see any of it. So that part frustrated me about the movie because he took out so much stuff that was great in the book that would have been cool to see on screen. But at the same time, it's just like he was having fun. I think that was kind of his James Cameron Avatar thing. He's like, what if we just do everything kind of with VR? Let's try it out. And it's like, it's not perfect, but it's Spielberg having fun with a new medium. And what more could you want from a movie? So I'm pro Ready Player One for sure.
Yeah, I fuck with Ready Player One. I love that movie. That's like my guilty pleasure movie when I'm like, I don't know what to watch and nothing's really like coming to me right now. It's like, yeah, turn on Ready Player One and just have a ball, have a good time. And I know, Ben, you and I have talked about this before. It's like, that's what made Jurassic Park. That's what made Indiana Jones. That's what made E.T. so good, is that it was Spielberg trying new things. And that's exactly what he did with Ready Player One. Regardless, of everything with the book, he expanded on what was possible in a film, which I think is really interesting. Back to the Fabelmans. I love the Fabelmans. This was my second time watching it. I saw it in the theaters when it made its very small national run, which I still don't really understand why it made such a small run up against so many big movies, and it only made like $12 million at the box office. And that'll be a whole big storyline to watch this year, I think, for the Oscars in terms of like box office success and what that means, right? Avatar: The Way of Water is aiming towards $2 billion right now. It just passed $1.5 billion at the box office. How does that gauge? How does that measure for something in terms of award season? I think will be interesting. The Fabelmans obviously is not going to be in that conversation, but this time that I saw it, I think it resonated with me a lot more than the first time. I think I went into it initially and I was like, this is going to be a good time about like making movies and growing up making movies and Spielberg doing his thing. And it was like so much more dramatic and emotionally taxing than I anticipated it to be, especially when it came to Michelle Williams playing Mitzi, playing Sam's mother. I think this is as much of a story about her as it is about Sam and their relationship and how they are juxtaposed as the two artists of the family. And we hear from the uncle that comes in later in a wonderful monologue performed by Judd Hirsch of art will tear you apart. It's art versus family. That's how it always will be, and it'll leave you brokenhearted and lonely. I think this movie expands on that very, very well. I already mentioned Gabriel LaBelle, but I think his nuance, his emotion is phenomenal. And talk about Spielberg. He just made West Side Story. That guy knows how to do stuff in schools. Like he knows how to make a really good movie that takes place in a school. When you talk about some of the biggest scenes of the movie, and especially that hallway scene, I know we're going to talk about that, where Sam is kind of talking to his bully and the power of cinema and the power of movies. This movie hit so much harder for me this time. And I'm curious, based on this watch for you guys, I think it was the first for both of you, when I went into it, I did not know that Mitzi was seeing Benny. I did not know that they were having an affair. I didn't know that they were emotionally dependent on one another until it was like very clearly explained to me. And I was like, oh, like that realization that Sam has when he's putting together and chopping up the movie.
Sammy.
Yes, Sammy. Thank you. When Sammy has the realization, I wonder, did you guys catch on to that the first time that you saw it? Was that a big point that you noticed right away? And I'm curious if I was in the minority on
that. I definitely didn't catch it early on. For me, it was it's the editing scene. So when he's editing the camping trip, and then we're seeing all of these scenes, and I was watching with my girlfriend, and I leaned over and I go, "Oh no, here's the intrigue." But one of the things that did to me, and we're going to talk about the last scene, I promise, but it made me look for more signals to other things. And when I was going over my notes earlier today to kind of refresh myself on some of the stuff, Michelle Williams, Mitzi's sort of descent into like, eccentricness, eccentricity, or whatever it is so much more obvious because I'm now expecting it, because I'm picking up on the little things a little bit more than the absurdity of, why did you buy a monkey? I wanted to laugh. Like that sort of stuff that comes later. It's this sort of like baiting and growth that's built into it. And so as soon as I realized Mitzi and Benny were having what we later find out is an emotional affair, it made me look at her choices a lot deeper. And it just, wow, what a performance from both of them. Seriously.
Yeah, they both did a great job. I knew the backstory before going into the movie. I had watched the HBO doc on Spielberg and read some stuff on him, and was kind of aware of his childhood, and how that played out. I did some research. We watched Close Encounters, and there's a lot of stuff with the parents in there. That's a common theme, obviously, for him, is his parents and mothers and things like that. So I was familiar with it going into it. I was curious to see how he was going to tell that story. That's kind of more what I was watching, because the minute Seth Rogen walks in, for the dinner, I was like, okay, cool. We're setting the tone here. He's around, and then when she's like, oh, we can't leave without him, all that kind of stuff. It's all right, cool. This is it's cool to see how it's all playing out. Obviously there's, one of the shots after they're showing, he's showing one of his films, and Paul Dano looks over at Michelle Williams, but the camera pans over to Michelle Williams and Seth Rogen looking at each other. And it's oh yeah, that's him telling you this is the thing, it's she doesn't care about this guy. She cares about this guy. It's you're just telling it with the camera. And so I thought it was great. So yeah, I went into it more waiting to see how he was going to tell it. So it was very, very well done.
And
Can
speaking,
I pose
go
a
ahead.
curveball question here? Sorry, I wrote this. I'm not going to continually say I wrote this in my notes, but and maybe this is for you, Ben, or Ethan, just your encyclopedia brain. But how much of these story beats are accurate? Because at a certain point, I looked over and I was basically thinking I don't know a lot about Spielberg, or I didn't realize his dad was an absolute fucking genius, and that they moved around a lot. I mean, I knew about his film school. I knew kind of about his college career. I didn't know anything about his childhood. Are we kind of supposed to take this as nearly a 1-to-1?
I think a lot of it is very, very accurate. This is where I haven't been able to go back and confirm what I thought going into it, because my understanding going into the movie was actually that his dad kind of took the rap for the reason they got divorced. And he didn't find out till he was much older that his mom had been having an affair. So for a long time, he held that against his dad, that they got divorced, and was so angry at him. And then found out, I believe, again, as an adult, what the truth was, that his dad was I just don't want you to hate your mom, so I'll take the heat. But it actually was her that caused us to break up, So that was my understanding of what the real story is. So I was surprised in this one where he discovers it sooner and tells her, and he kind of exposes it to her. If anyone's listening to this and knows that I'm wrong, please let me know. But that had always been my understanding of the situation, that he had a grudge against his dad, but it was misguided. It should have been towards his mom, but his dad was like, I'll take the heat because I want you guys to have a good relationship. So that, as far as I know, is the only thing that wasn't 100% accurate of how it all happened, but I think he still got the tone of it across, you know, in the movie. That's where I think he took a little creative license of like, it might be boring to tell people like, oh, I actually found out in my 20s about it. You know, it's like, no, I got to like in this movie, I got to say it as a teenager, you know, that kind of a thing. So I feel like that's where the creative license comes in, and the overall like idea of it is there, but I don't know that was 100% accurate about how it happened.
I think with that story, I think it's really interesting that Paul Dano plays this role, because I think knowing that, even though we don't see that in the film, Paul Dano kind of materializes that essence and that vibe of I'll be the rap guy. I'm the science guy that nobody cares about. I'm the genius that's going to change the world, but nobody respects. And it's fine because I love everybody and I love my family, right? Art is not competing with that family side of what he is doing and how his life is. On the flip side, you have Seth Rogen playing Benny. Now, when he shows up, I felt like it's a very Seth Rogen entrance, right? We get a very
He's
comedic,
grandma, right? Yeah,
right, carrying the grandma, very center screen. We get a Seth Rogen laugh. We're like, okay, this is Seth Rogen, and he plays a large role in this movie. He is very pivotal in how Sammy and Mitzi and the entire family essentially turn out. Matt, how did you feel about Seth Rogen playing Benny in this film?
I thought Spielberg did such a great job of directing him to hit on his sort of comedic prowess and the delivery, while still maintaining this really grounded and real sense that he was Paul Dano's best friend, which is something that they both say up until that very pivotal scene when she says, he's not your best friend, but you knew he was my friend. Once they've moved to California, which is kind of the last straw. I think, focusing specifically on Rogan, the scene in the camera shop where we essentially assume that Sam/Sammy is going to give up on his dream. Did anybody really think he was going to sell his camera and never make another movie?
That was going to be the end. He was like, that's it for me.
Cut to black.
I don't think so. But that teenage angst was played so well. But where Seth ends up buying him gets that specialty camera delivered and then gives it to him, and then still manages to slip the dollars back into Sammy's pocket. I thought that was a really great call it a wrap, because we don't see Benny again after that. We see him in a photo later, but that's really the end of him as a character. I think because we have Sammy's small video that he has left, the splices that he did in the moment, I thought during the camping scene, or during the filming of the camping scene and the editing, that he was going to include those nods to Benny and Mitzi's relationship. I really thought he was, and then when he showed it to the family, I thought it would be this reveal.
Interesting.
But when he has it on a small tape and it's perfectly mixed and Mitzi realizes it, I think Seth didn't need to play a bigger role. I think the subtleties of sort of the call it backdoor man, that used to mean you went in and out the back door, nothing to do with whatever sexually. Seth really, he really nails it. And I think a lot of that could be, last thing I'll say about this, that could be a very overwritten part. And it could be violent. There could be some sort of altercation. There's really no confrontation between Paul and Benny, Paul Dano's fatherly character and Benny. And so I think that subtly speaking, it's a perfect role.
Yeah, I think he does a great job. Like you mentioned, Ethan, like Paul, like I guess his name's Bert in the movie, but he does kind of even though not directly as it does in real life, but he kind of takes the blame for it anyways. Like, oh, it was my career drivenness that drove your mom away. Like, this is still my fault, kind of a thing. That still comes across. But I like that with Seth Rogen, we get moments of him and Paul Dano together, just like talking. So we can actually see their friendship. So it's not so forced of just like, who's this weird guy hanging out? It's like, no, he was around. He was Uncle Benny. I did like the grandma being like, he's not your uncle. Stop saying that, you know. And that was like the
first, not related.
Yeah, I guess like the first hint of like what was to come. But fun to kind of see how that all played out throughout the movie of singing around the campfire. Then Seth Rogen, Benny starts going off on a new song, and Bert's kind of like, okay, I've lost everybody now, so
Yeah.
whatever, we'll just move on, and how that just continues on throughout the whole movie. But I think Seth Rogen, I was curious like why he cast him, because he is the Pineapple Express dude, he is super
Yeah.
bad, whatever, but at the same time he's also like the 50-50 dude. He's also like, he can play these dramatic roles and he can do them well, and I think we saw that here also. I think he did a good job.
Yeah, I think he did a great job in this role. I agree with you, Matt. I think it could have really been overwritten and overproduced and overdone when it came to this character, and really much more in your face. And I love the subtlety, especially Ben. You kind of mentioned that camping trip when it's just them, when we're focused on just Bert and Benny having the conversation about the processors and everything that's going on at work and the president, and they're going to get fired. They are best friends. They're very much in the thick of it together. And so to see Seth Rogen's ability to kind of suck that joy out of Paul Dano's character, Bert, and for Bert to continually feel that heartbreak, even in the very beginning when Mitzi says, like, Bert, I love your brain, and I love that Benny is here to help me understand your brain or explain your brain. That for me, that's just as heartbreaking as the end of the movie, as towards the end when you see the life kind of slip out of Bert and say, and realize that Mitzi can't live without Benny. She just can't. And that's just what their life has now become. I love that casting choice. Before we get to the Oscars power ranking, I have one more question. At the very end of this movie, we get just an absolutely maddening David Lynch cameo as John Ford. I didn't see it coming. There's no way either of you saw it coming. This is probably the cameo of the year in terms of like putting someone in your movie just because you can. This was incredible. His monologue was incredible. Everything about the horizon and that fucking final Spielberg shot of West Side Storying the camera and doing a little jig to like move the horizon was sublime. I thought this was incredible, and I loved every second of David Lynch in this movie. Ben, how did you feel?
I loved it, man. I thought it was so cool seeing him show up as John Ford, because I was like growing up, my mom was super into Westerns, and as a kid, I think like most kids are, I was like, oh, my mom like this is probably boring, so I'm not going to watch it. And then, later growing up and going to film school, like the teacher put on Stagecoach, and I was like, oh, this John Ford guy, okay, he knows what he's doing. This is like really fucking good. And then going back and like, I need to watch more John Ford stuff now. So I was stoked to see David Lynch playing John Ford. Was so cool. Again, like going back to school was very much learning kind of the rule of thirds, when it comes to what's on screen, like put it in the left third, put it in the right third, just don't put it in the middle. That's not interesting. And then the way that's told in this movie is just, it's so great. Isn't his actual phrasing like, that's fucking boring or something like that? Like, if it's in the middle, it's like, it's fucking boring. Like, and I loved it. I thought it was so cool. He's like, tell me about that picture and all that kind of stuff. He's like, there's something in the background. That's interesting. There's something in the foreground. That's interesting. So I just love that whole moment. And it was just like a real chaotic way to like go out with the movie. And just like almost guns blazing, like, let's let David Lynch just come tear up the scenery for a while. We'll give you one more shot afterwards, then we're out of here. It's like, dude, that was great. I loved it, man. It's perfect.
Yeah. What did you think, Matt?
I felt the same way. We spent the previous 2 hours and however many minutes just getting so invested in these characters and really in Sammy's arc and his basic comeback to his love of film and creating film. And we have that really emotional scene right before where they're in Los Angeles, but they're in an apartment. And Bert is saying, hey, check the mail. And what's the first thing he pulls out? A bunch of pictures of Bert of Mitzi and Uncle Benny and the sisters. And now you realize, oh man, they are, we're in a different place now. This isn't the familial home we just saw that they had been waiting those months to get built. But that's not the letter that Bert wanted him to see. It's from CBS of all people. And I went, oh, we're going back to the movies. And I couldn't think how you could possibly tie a bow, because I wanted to see the next 15 years, right? I wanted to see him go to film school. I wanted to see some of those early, I wanted just little tidbits. And then we're going around the room, the camera, as we finally get into John's office, and we're going around the room, and I'm like, no way. I was so excited. And then when it was David Lynch, I was like, are you kidding me right now?
Mhm.
It was an absolute mic drop moment. Fast dialogue, really viscerally consuming that cigar. You know, the way he's
Oh
peeling the end
yeah.
off. He does it
Oh, yeah.
twice.
And we see the
Strikes the
whole
match.
thing too.
Mhm.
Strikes the match on the leather on the desk. And he looks so old and frail, but it's like he's done this more than once. So he's going to
Yeah.
get it just
Yeah.
fine. Even the exec is like, yeah, let's see how long you last. And the lady's like, you know, you're not going to get very long in there. The secretary outside. I was jaw on the floor. And then I called this out earlier, but this trick where we've been taught through the camera to look for little changes. And immediately after he says, you know, if it's at the top, if it's in the bottom, it's interesting. If it's in the middle, it's fucking boring. And get the fuck out of my office. And we get this scene and he's skipping down and it's golden hued. It looks like Hollywood finally.
Yep.
And I'm like, both my girlfriend and I looked at each other and went, at the horizon. And then the camera shifts. And I went,
Yeah.
son of a bitch.
You did it.
It's so
So
good,
good.
though. Like I
So
didn't know.
good.
I didn't know what he was gonna do because I could see Spielberg being like, you know what, I'm gonna fuck with you guys. I'm gonna leave the horizon in the middle, and we're gonna cut to
Yeah,
black.
totally.
It's like it was still a really cool shot. You know, I'm like, oh, this is him saying like maybe you know your heroes don't always know what's right or whatever. You know, I was like, oh, this is gonna be a cool way to go. But then you just like see the camera like kind of jolt and then like hurry and pan up. Like, okay, that was really cool. That was awesome.
It's definitely Spielberg saying, I'm the best. Look, I'm the greatest. I'm exceptionally good at what I do, and I know that. And I'm gonna prove it to you in just such a small little second. Spielberg can maneuver a room just so incredibly well. I just wanted to put that out there. It's kind of like unbelievable how well, especially in that apartment scene that we get at the end, we're just kind of navigating so smoothly between these tight spaces and moving in and out. And we do the same thing in the Fabelmans home. It is really impressive. We're going to do True Cinema. This is where we kind of take a list of scenes. We choose our true cinema moment for the movie. Maybe it's something that we, thought was the funniest or the most heartfelt or just the best to look at and what that means to you. Normally, for 24 minutes of A24, we'll use this to kind of go through the movie. We've already talked about the movie, so I'm just going to lay out a handful of potential ones. Ben's not going to pick any because he's too good for this short list. Yep. I'm positive. Ben, if you ran the Oscars, shit would be crazy, dude. You'd be like, look, here's the short list, but we're not picking any of them. We're going off script. That would be pretty fun. Okay, so here's a short list. We get the introduction to Sammy. He gets a train car. I think that's definitely worth mentioning. Sets all of this off. Tornado scene. We're going to talk about the tornado scene, so I don't want to go into too much detail here, but I think it's a very interesting, if not divisive, scene in the movie. The camping trip, very pivotal in understanding how Mitzi is feeling and everything that she has been maybe refusing to accept about her life and how she feels. Uncle Boris monologue. I kind of briefly touched on this. This is where Judd Hirsch comes in and just absolutely rips it up for like 6 minutes. And dips and he makes the hand signal. Really, really good stuff. We get the argument with Sammy and Mitzi slapping Sammy and having really their first kind of emotional explosion. Moving to California, I think, is a really interesting choice in this movie, showing the Ditch Day movie and the hallway scene and everything that kind of takes place in that high school. And then we get the studio visit at the end. Those are just a few of the highlights. Obviously, there's 2.5 hours worth of material here that we're not going to completely cover. Matt, you're the guest. I want you to go first. Choose your true cinema moment of the Fabelmans. In and of itself, a true cinema moment for 2.5 hours.
Absolutely. So, and I will just say, picking from the list and even my cursory remembrance of the film, I'm going to draw back to the final scene. And I really want to make a connection from the first scene, call out a couple points in the middle, and then really at the end. And this is not me like making an outline of the film, but we get the line.
It sounds like you're cheating, is what it sounds like. It sounds like, well, I'm just going to choose one of each.
No. I've in recent, we didn't talk about Babylon or any of these other movies that are about movies. So I don't want to go too off topic. I don't want to go too off topic, but I have a feeling that this year is the year where the Oscars are films that are telling you what they are about explicitly and then being about them. Mm-hmm. And very early on in this film, we get the line from Mitzi to young Sammy, movies are dreams. And I found that at every major point where we were making a film, we as in the audience and Sammy, it was a dream. It was idyllic. It was absolutely almost the movie within the movie within the movie. We're getting at Inception levels of production here. And I kept saying, we're hitting these really great beats. Ben, you mentioned Westerns. We got a really great Western at the beginning with no vocals. We get a great war movie. We get the beach towel movie, as one of the characters said.
Yeah.
I wrote down that it looks like one of those scenes. It looks like a cut from one of the movies that Elvis was in randomly during that time. So we get these little vignettes that I felt like were the dream. And then at the end, where, like you said, Ben, we could get stuck with Spielberg saying, but they're perfect as they are, or just essentially, this is my family, this is who they are. We get that last little correction that we're trying to be better and we're still learning because this is a dream that we're a part of. Boom, camera pans up, fade to black. I thought that being told that explicitly by a character, and then I followed it. I basically went down the magical road, for the whole 2 hours plus.
Yeah.
I personally really, really liked, and again, I think it's a power move from Spielberg to have Paul Dano in the first 2 minutes literally explain to you the science of a movie, of a moving picture. This is what happens in your brain, and coming from that character of Bert is incredible. It's such a wonderful preface to what we're going to see him achieve in this family. And I think you're totally right, Matt, of here's what we are talking about. Let's go do it for 2.5 hours is totally the theme of big epic films this year. And I love it. And I just eat it up every single time. Ben, what do you got?
Mine, it's definitely more personal than anything where I would like show someone be like, this is the best scene in the movie. But the one that hit me the most as someone who like discovered film editing in high school and just like, that's what I do for a living. Like I love video production. The scene where he shows the Western and there's like the flashes during all the shoots and all the kids like, whoa, what? Like, how'd you do that? Like all that kind of stuff. And like what like comes before that of him watching it and just saying fake, like it doesn't, it's not real, whatever. Then we have the piano scene where Mitzi steps through, one of the sheets of music and we see the hole in it. And then after he shows the movie, he's in the car with Paul Dano and he's like, how did you do that? He's like, pins, and just like that whole thing of like, I remember the first rush I have on the first thing I ever edited. And I was like, oh, I did this. Like I put this together. This is super cool. It's this weird rush that you can't really get any other way. And I just felt like I connected with that watching him explain like, yeah, I just poked holes with the pins in the film strip because then the light would come through. So it would look like a shot. And you see like Paul Dano, who's like the scientist dad being like, whoa, you're doing this like an engineer. That's awesome. So like you can do this creative stuff, but you can do it in a scientific way, all that kind of whatever. So for me, that whole scene is like, that's my true cinema moment. Like I love that so much, but honestly, we've talked about it. This whole movie, as someone who Ethan just watched Boogie Nights, this is Spielberg being Dirk Diggler and just like whipping it on the table and being like,
this is what I got.
Dick, I'm the star. Like, I'll tell you when we roll, like that's what he's doing this whole movie. He's like, I can do whatever I want. I'm Steven Spielberg. And he does it this whole movie. Like there's nothing as like fascinating necessarily as like Jurassic Park or anything like that. Like there's not this huge spectacle, but he does what he does so well and just like telling an emotional personal story and he just crushes it. And so again, this is something that we'll call like a dartboard movie where you could just like throw a dartboard at any scene or throw a dart at any scene and it's going to be a great true cinema moment. So this is a great movie.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Boogie Nights fucking rips, by the way. I don't know why it took me so long to watch Boogie Nights, but I texted you after I saw it.
In your amazing analogy, does that make us the Philip Seymour Hoffman character? Does that make us William H. Macy?
If I can be John C. Reilly, any role I can be John C. Reilly, I'll take it. Like
it's a big win.
I'll do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That movie's unreal. Super, super good. I'm gonna piggyback off you just a little bit, Ben. I actually think for me, again, a very personal kind of attachment to a scene is exactly that moment that you're talking about, but for kind of different reasons. I guess not exactly, but I'm kind of going right off of what you said of in the car when Sammy and his dad are talking about that, and Sammy is so excited. He used pins, he figured it out, he made art, and he figured out how to make his movie look real, how to do exactly what he wants to do in something that he does not consider a hobby, something that he's willing to spend $100 on to film a war movie over a weekend. And I think I really connected with Paul Dano's kind of juxtaposition to this excitement is him kind of leveling things back down and saying, awesome, you're an engineer, you figured it out. Now you can now you can have science, and now you can learn how to make things. And that is what I liked as a kid. I wanted to know, how did somebody make this? How did they make this rear view mirror? How did they make this car work? And that's what you can do now that you've figured this out. So you can use your hobby as a jumping point into something that's productive for society, and you can make something real. And I know that in that scene, that is a very specific mention. You can make something that's real. You can make something that impacts society. And I just relate to that, obviously not on the level that Steven Spielberg or Sammy does, but my dad's not a huge movie guy. He doesn't really get movies. And when I try to talk to him about movies, he's like, oh, okay, like, I don't get it. And that's fine, but it's also like kind of elevated this moment for me of some people just don't get it. And like, that's totally okay, but it's heartbreaking if you're in the seat that Sammy is in. And Gabriel LaBelle plays that just wondrously in that scene, taking that and utilizing that and the facial expressions of pure heartbreak of like, you keep calling this a hobby. It is not a hobby. It is what I do, and it's what I want to do. That's definitely my scene. I did want to put the Uncle Boris monologue on here. I think it is really powerful. I think it's a great kind of Twitter clip that can now go around now that we have the movie on VOD and in our possession. I think is incredible. And I love him showing the Ditch Day video. I think is really good scene as well. Seeing everybody's reaction, seeing what he is able to do with the power of that movie and how he is able to paint pictures of people in a certain light and really control. And I think the theme of control throughout this movie is very, very impressively told. And we know that from the very beginning. Sammy wants control. He wants to figure out how to live in his little pocket. And that's what Mitzi always wanted as well. And she just took her a long time and lots of heartbreak to get there. And Sammy was lucky enough to figure it out a lot faster than she ever did. Are we thinking, I know we're going to talk about other categories, but Paul Dano, best supporting actor? Could happen here? How are we feeling about that?
I think it could happen. I just think, everyone is in the wake of Ke Huy Quan. You know what I mean? Like, he's taking home whatever it is. So, like, you could put any 4 people you want there with him. But I think Paul Dano, especially on the second watch, I was like, yeah, he played that role really well. You know, like, he and Michelle Williams do a wonderful job giving across like the science side and the creative side. And they do that both, even just in their physicality and all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't be upset if either of them get a nom from this. Yeah.
What about you, Matt?
I second everything you just said. Honestly, I expected, I hate to say I expected more, because again, it's Steven Spielberg putting his dick on the table. This is exactly what Steven Spielberg wanted the movie to be. And if that wasn't the performance he wanted out of Paul Dano, it would have been a different performance. I truly believe in a director's ability to pull from their characters. So, and a writer too, to pull from their characters as well. So I think truly that's exactly the experience they were looking for. I just thought Michelle Williams did such a better job. Obviously, she's not up for the same, but I thought she, as far as the adults go, definitely stole the show. Great.
Yeah, she was excellent. We'll talk about her in a minute here. Let's do our Oscars power rankings. We're going to do this every week until the Oscars to kind of track where Clayton sees things standing for Variety. You can go Google Variety Oscars Hub, and this will come right up. It'll be the first option. It's a detailed analysis and power rankings of every single category, all 15 categories. And so I'm going to go through what he has on Variety.com right now. Then we're going to give our power rankings, see where the Fabelmans sits in there, see any movements from week to week. I'm really interested to see, especially for Ben and I, as we go through this exercise week after week, if we watch a movie, how does that recency bias immediately affect our power rankings? How do we feel maybe the closer we get as more campaigning happens and things like that? So as of today, January 3rd is the recording date of this podcast. Here are the 10 predicted Best Picture nominees, because we're still in the territory of no nominees yet. We are when this comes out, we'll be just a few days away from having the 10 nominees, from having the list. But we know that The Fabelmans is going to be in, and there's no question about it, and nobody ever second guessed that. We've got Top Gun Maverick at number 1. Number 2, The Fabelmans, The Banshees of Inisherin, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Tar, Elvis, Avatar: The Way of Water, Women Talking, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and All Quiet on the Western Front. I believe that power ranking remains the same as last week. So not much has changed over the short holiday break that we've had here. Matt, where does The Fabelmans fall on your Oscars power rankings? How many Oscar contending movies have you seen so far? Give me the rundown, man.
Yeah, I feel like it's probably more fair for me to do a top 3 and let you two kind of talk through why you've placed where these are. Number 1, I'm a guest. Number 2, I've only seen 6 of those, and most of them once. I still haven't seen Tar, so that's trouble. Also,
I shouldn't even have invited you on the fucking pod. That should be the number 1 question before you come on the pod. Is like, have you seen Tar? And you're like, no. And I'm like, hey, sorry, you can't be on the pod until you fucking see Tar. I'm losing my mind over here.
I'm well aware of the shame that saying that out loud carries. It's almost as bad as admitting that I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once like 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So I was very late to that, and not for a lack of trying. I just couldn't make it to a theater. So my top 3, it's definitely Everything Everywhere All at Once is still at number 1. That's a personal choice that comes from. It's one thing to say, I am creating the joy of cinema, and that's The Fabelmans. It's another thing to make a movie that never says I've created the joy of cinema. It just is. And that is Everything Everywhere All at Once.
That's a great way to put it.
I think for the way my brain works, my ADD rattled brain, Everything Everywhere All at Once was jam-packed with exactly what I wanted. And I cried my eyes out at the end. So that's number 1 for me. Fabelmans pushes out my previous number 2 pick. So Fabelmans at 2, and then at 3 I've got The Banshees of Inisherin, which I think was just an amazing allegory for Ireland and Irish turmoil. So
yeah,
those are my top 3.
Nice.
Okay, have you seen Top Gun Maverick though?
Oh, absolutely. Oh,
not in the top 3. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to be sure it wasn't one of the 4 that you have not seen, because then we'd have a real problem on the pod.
Oh. Listen, I've been living under a rock, but not that large.
I like it. I'll give mine. Again, like I haven't seen all of these. Some of these are just kind of based off of what the rumors seem to be or whatever, that kind of a thing. I'm with you, Malik. Everything Everywhere is going to be my number 1 spot for the next, 10 weeks. Like, I don't know. I can't imagine what I'm going to watch that's going to make me feel any differently about that. I will say on this rewatch though, Fabelmans, I believe, moved up from last week. I don't remember exactly what I had, but it takes my number 2 spot. Maverick is more of a wish. I hope it's in the 3rd spot because, even if it is like a legacy thing for Tom Cruise, but it's also just like a really great movie. It's a lot of fun. Tar, Banshees, Avatar, Women Talking, Triangle Sadness, She Said, and because I loved it more than Ethan did, I'm putting After Sun in my top 10 for Best Picture.
You love to see it, and I hope that comes true. I hope After Sun gets a kick, man. They could be seeing some historical stuff with Charlotte Wells and After Sun in the next couple weeks. So anything is possible at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting too that generally the Academy allows one blockbuster spot, right? And that's either going to go to Avatar: The Way of Water or Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, or that could be occupied by Top Gun Maverick. I'm not sure how that is really going to shake out in terms of like the blockbuster slot for this year, which I think is interesting because currently, we've got Avatar and Maverick in this lineup. Will the Academy see both on kind of different grounds? I don't know. Here's my power rankings. I've got some changes from last week. If you're keeping track, because I am, because I'm really interested in my own obsessive nature with the Oscars. And I've got a new addition. I'm not going to say it yet, but I really want to. But I'm going to say it in a second. We've got Top Gun Maverick at number 1. I still think I still think it's got the shot. When you talk about preferential balloting, I just feel good about Top Gun Maverick. Probably because the movie fucking rips, but I feel good about it. I've got the excuse me, the Fabelmans up from number 3. I've got the Fabelmans at number 2 now. Elvis at number 3. That was number 2 last week, so we did a little swapsies there. Everything Everywhere All at Once at number 4. Now this was number 6 last week, so we've jumped a couple spots. I'm feeling better about that now that I've been sitting on the movie for a little bit. Tar stays at number 5. Even though I fuck with Tar a lot, I don't think it's going to win Best Picture. I still think it's in that race. The Banshees of Inisherin is number 6. That's down from number 4. I've got Avatar: The Way of Water. For me, is going to be the blockbuster. I'm kicking out Wakanda Forever this week. It is not on my power rankings. I just don't see that happening. Even with Disney campaigning for Angela Bassett very steeply and very hard for a kind of Best Supporting Actress, I just don't think that's going to happen. Triangle of Sadness cracks this time. I think that movie's a sleeper right now, and I think it's going to play pretty well with the international side of the Academy. Women Talking is going to make my list, even though I haven't seen it yet. It hasn't had a real wide release as of recording, but I think it'll be there. And at number 10, I've got Babylon. Babylon is incredible. I want to just digress and have a Babylon pod right now, but we very well might be able to do that the week before the Oscars. If Babylon does make the nomination list, we will see what happens. 2-minute digression. Matt, you've seen Babylon. Ben has not, so don't spoil anything. Give me like your really quick 30-second rundown. You love Babylon or what?
I didn't love it. Really enjoyed it.
All right, we'll just get back to the pod. We'll just get back to the notes. Back to the notes. That's not okay. That's fine. Don't worry about it. But you've seen it. I'm glad you've seen it because it needs all the box office help it can get, brother.
It does. Margot Robbie for Best Actress.
Oh, I love that. Okay, let's do some other categories before we get out of here. We'll do, obviously we don't have an official nomination list yet. We think this will be up for Best Picture. I think the biggest shot it has at winning anything else is Best Director. Obviously, Steven Spielberg, very well-known name in the Academy. He has taken home 2 previous Best Director awards for Saving Private Ryan and for Schindler's List, and he also won Best Picture for Schindler's List. So huge wins there. He's been nominated 13 times since he began making movies. So he's going to be nominated again. He very likely, in my eyes, is going to be winning Best Director. He'll be going up against the Daniels, which I think will be an interesting competition because the Oscars and the Academy generally doesn't favor duo directors, except for the Coens. But that is, again, pretty few and far between. Could also see this coming into Best Original Screenplay. Obviously, that's going to be against Banshees. I think that is Banshees of Inisherin's race to lose right now. Yeah. Possibly getting a Gabriel LaBelle Best Actor nomination, possibly a Paul Dano, and possibly a Michelle Williams Best Supporting. And category fraud, that's another thing we'll talk about for another pod. But Michelle Williams seems like a very strategic campaign going for a supporting actress role to win that, especially when you have Everything Everywhere All at Once. Still pretty undecided if they're going to go with Stephanie Hsu or Jamie Lee Curtis. And then you've got Carrie Condon for Banshees of Inisherin. It's kind of an up in the air race, at least in my opinion. Ben, what do you think? What do you think the Fabelmans is taking home? If it's taking home anything?
I mean, if it takes home Best Picture, I think it will also take home Best Director. Those kind of seem to go hand in hand. But again, like I want both of those to be Everything Everywhere and Daniels.
Yep.
Obviously, Spielberg's great, but to think this is like the second feature film for Daniels after doing basically like a bunch of music videos, just the best Lil Jon music video ever, and then doing Swiss Army Man. And then you come with this fucking gut punch movie about this multiverse thing. It's like, I would love to see them recognized. But I think even getting nominated will be great. So I want them there. I am curious where Michelle Williams is going to end up, because even Clayton talked about maybe her being in the contention with Michelle Yeoh and Cate Blanchett. So who knows where they're actually going to place her. But I think it'll probably be Spielberg and Fabelmans will probably take home the gold.
You thinking the same thing, Matt? You going for Best Director here, or are we going all the way for the duo?
No, I definitely think this is Spielberg's Oscar. Based on what I've seen, I still have a couple other films. And Ben, great point. They go hand in hand predominantly. Best Picture, Best Director. But but yeah, it's interesting too that you mentioned, because I would put Michelle Williams in the best actress or best female actor category
Mm-hmm.
um, before I would put supporting. But then again, who is the protagonist? It's Sammy. So
Yeah.
technically, he's leading actor. Anyway, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
I think in that category, that is Michelle Yeoh's to lose.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So we'll see. Also, best original screenplay. I could see that too, especially if this movie misses out on some of the other big ones. Um, Not to say that the Oscars are consolation or like offer Oscars as consolation, but some people think that Leo didn't deserve it for The Revenant.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
Deserved it for some other stuff.
Marty get it for
Ethan
The
loves his
Departed, like
Yep.
it's, yeah.
exactly. It feels like there's some makeup Oscars, doesn't it?
And what better film than his life story to be like, all right, sorry, we probably screwed up a little bit in the past, so here you go.
Yeah, that's definitely leading my thought process. I think two Oscars is incredible, but to have three sounds right. It sounds better for Spielberg. Honestly, it sounds deserved. And it's fucking Steven Spielberg making a movie about his life in a year in which there are so many movies about movies. Like, this is the year where Hollywood was like, listen, we got to tell people that like movies are out here because we got to make movies about movies. And I think it's a perfect storm for Spielberg to take home Best Director. And Ben, I do agree with you. I think if he goes Best Director, I could definitely see that kind of being the duo of Best Director, Best Picture, and taking home that for the Fabelmans. And again, at the end of the day, we just all didn't want to believe that it was going to happen. Maybe we just have too much hope for Everything Everywhere All at Once. Maybe we trust too much in the Academy to make the cultured choice. We will kind of see how that plays out. The last thing I want to do, we're going to do this every week, and we did it last week with our guests, and it was awesome. We're talking about a new movie every week, so we found it only fitting that we talk about a different kind of category through history when it comes to the Oscars. Now, it feels right with the Fabelmans. Of course, we're talking about Best Picture here, but mostly we're talking about Best Director with Steven Spielberg. So I'm curious, Best Director wins throughout history. When I was doing a little bit of research today, this afternoon, avoiding work and working on a podcast instead, I was fired up at my desk, to say the least, because Best Director seems like a lot of snubs are out there, man. It seems like a lot of things where I was just like, this motherfucker won over this movie? Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is insane. Matt, we'll start with you. Anything that caught your eye, that you attached to the most, that you think is the most interesting or was the funnest, or whatever the case may be, for Best Director throughout the history of the Academy Awards?
So I've got two for you, and it's really just focusing on two different films. First of all, how fucking great is it that Inarritu won it back-to-back years?
Yeah.
Back.
That was crazy.
I mean, I think that's such a huge call out. I put Birdman or The Unexpected Virtue of Innocence in my top 5 movies of all time. So that is, without a doubt, one of my most,
Nice.
in my personal opinion, a perfect film. So I love to see him get it again the following year. And then the other thing I'll call out, this movie was brought to my attention through a movie club that I'm in with some people, same people I went and saw Babylon with in theaters. But Milos Forman in 1984 winning for Amadeus.
Mm-hmm.
I had never seen that movie, and oh my God, what a tour de force that was. So I couldn't tell you another thing that he's done, which is probably to my own detriment. And I'm sure people listening or watching right now will be like, oh, you missed this, you missed that. I'm not going to look it up fast enough. I just want to say it was really cool to pull that one out, because I don't think with my other group we ever even talked about that it won an Oscar.
Yeah.
So it was just really cool to catch that after being so moved by another film. So those are my two, Inarritu and Milos.
Yeah, for Milos, there's two movies I think of. One of my favorites is one of my favorite biopics of all time is Man on the Moon with Jim Carrey. He did that one, but he also won for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They did Best Picture. I mean, that one took home like 5 Academy Awards. So
yeah,
that's him. But Amadeus, yeah, for sure. But my personal favorite is Man on the Moon. I love that. It's such a, speaking of Judd Hirsch, with the Taxi and all that kind of stuff. So I love that movie. For me, on here, honestly, like it was more going through this. It was just like how many times I was bummed that people that lost, you know,
See what I mean?
like
it's a brutal read.
Yeah. Like obviously Pulp Fiction losing to Forrest Gump was just like, what are we doing?
Academy Award winner Robert Zemeckis, who also directed The Polar Express.
Yeah. The fact that like Hitchcock never won Academy Award is crazy. I did think about the Inarritu ones, and they're so interesting because of like the production story behind it, how like they started filming Revenant and then they had to like move hemispheres because they were like losing the light and stuff. And so in between there, he decided to film Birdman and then did all that and then went back and finished Revenant afterwards. And it's just like crazy that he won back to back like best directors.
Are you serious?
And he just like bookended Birdman with the Revenant. It's like, fuck, man, like that was amazing. Like it's like so good. So yeah, those were fantastic. I love seeing Catherine Bigelow win over James Cameron, mainly just because I love Point Break so much. Like that was just like one of the best. But overall, I think it's someone that you talked about earlier, Ethan. It's the Coen brothers winning for No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
Again, like that was a big year personally because like PTA put out There Will Be Blood. Tony Gilroy, who we talked about earlier, was also up for Michael Clayton. Juno was that year as well. So it was a solid year, but I was just more glad to see the Coens win something. It's not something that I would have thought the guys that did Big Lebowski would ever win an Oscar, you know? So when they did, I was like, okay, this is kind of actually fucking cool that they pulled this off. So that for me is probably like my favorite.
I could give hope to the Daniels. You never know.
Yeah.
I have to tie this back to my humble brag about reading a bunch of books, but No Country for Old Men is based on the Cormac McCarthy novel. He won the Pulitzer Prize for The Road, which is a Viggo Mortensen movie.
Yeah.
And anyway, so they
Who's
did
in Lord of the Rings, which Peter Jackson won for. Keep
it going, you guys. We'll get to Kevin Bacon eventually. No, but I do want to say the translation of the text onto the screen is one of the best I've seen for an adapted screenplay in a long time. I told you I had two I wanted to talk about. The third one that I wrote right here is No Country for Old Men.
Nice.
So,
that's awesome.
Glad you brought it up.
That's super rad. Yeah. I think it's worth noting this movie obviously revolves a lot around John Ford and kind of that really maybe unattainable nature that cinema offers, that someone could be so good and the gap could be so vast between different people that are addicted to the same thing, really, that love the same form of art. He is the only director to have won 4 Academy Awards. In 1935, he won for The Informer, which is a big movie. We see a big poster for that. He also won in 1940, 1941, and 1952 for The Grapes of Wrath, How Green Was My Valley, and The Quiet Man, respectively. So that's impressive that he's the only director to win 4 Best Director Academy Awards. But again, yeah, massive upsets. This is tough to go through. I mean, Kevin Costner wins for Dances with Wolves over Scorsese for Goodfellas in 1990, and Goodfellas defined a new mode of cinema. So I don't know. I don't hear a lot of people talking about Dances with Wolves on the daily. So that was a tough one. I think we kind of mentioned some makeup awards earlier. You mentioned The Revenant and how that kind of maybe was Leo's time. We've got The Departed for Scorsese of maybe the Academy saying, okay, maybe you do need to be recognized sooner rather than later. I wrote Peter Jackson on here for Return of the King. I feel like that's kind of that culmination award of like, you did it, you hit it home, and you're one of the few people to ever make a really outstanding epic trilogy like that and really kind of culminate in something so fantastic. Catherine Bigelow, you said Ben, but I wrote on here too, because she wins over James Cameron, her ex-husband, who helped produce that movie, and that was Avatar's year. That was the year that Avatar got 9 nominations, and she beat him out for the Best Picture, which I think is worth noting. Of course, I'm gonna mention Damien Chazelle for La La Land in 2016. It didn't win Best Picture, but it did win Best Director, so that's pretty cool. And then I think Bong Joon-ho for Parasite in 2019 is one of the best director moments that we maybe will get for a very, very long time. And it goes on to win a bunch of other awards, and that was the Parasite year. So I think there's a lot of exciting things. I think Best Director as a category is very, very extremes, like very high highs of like this person did it, and then very low lows of like, what are we doing? And I think this movie kind of talks about that of the greatest show on earth. I think is regarded as one of the worst Best Picture winners. So I think there's a big broad history with the Academy of trying to steer and navigate one way or the other, and probably overcompensating a lot of the time. Any closing thoughts on the Fabelmans, on the Oscars, on anything else before we get out of here? Matt, you got anything to share?
No, I mean, thank you guys for letting me come on and wax poetic about film. It's been absolutely amazing. I hope thousands of people listen to this, and it's been great. I hope I can come back once at some point.
Hi to Matt's Movie Club, because I'm assuming you're all supporting Matt by listening to this. So hello, everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. Ben, you got any closing thoughts on the Fabelmans? Feeling good?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just excited to see how this all plays out. I mean, it's Spielberg. My other pod, we do a Desert Island. If you could take the filmography of one person with you, and my answer was Spielberg, because the guy's full of quality and quantity. He's got it all, man. Like whatever you want. And so just to add this to the repertoire is huge. So it's a great movie. And I'm stoked to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm very, very excited. I think it's fun that we covered the Fabelmans so early in the Oscars race, because it's really, really kind of up to this movie to, I think it's definitely up to, I believe Universal, you mentioned, kind of put out this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's really up to them how much they're going to campaign for this movie, and how much they want to see this movie, how many awards they want to take home, right? Because this is the year, if there ever was a year in the last few, this is the year for big studios to take home those statues. Mm-hmm. Apple's not looking too great. They might have Causeway. They really don't have a lot out there. And same with Netflix. I feel like their last hope is kind of a Glass Onion situation that's really outside of that 10 conversation right now. And we'll see. Janelle Monáe potentially could pick up some speed for that race there. But again, streamers not looking super great when, in the past few years, they have been dominating the conversation. So we'll see how this movie campaigns. I'm really excited. I really want to see how the cast is going to campaign, and how Spielberg in particular is going to kind of do some interviews and do some talking and see what's good, see what's out there. Matt, thanks for coming on the pod. This has been a blast. This is awesome that you decided to join us, and we are so grateful. If people want to find more of you, you mentioned you have a movie club. Are you on social media? Where can people find you at?
You know what? I'll find you.
Very menacing.
Matt,
I like that.
Matt the Enigma. Are you on Letterboxd, Matt? Are you on Letterboxd?
I am, but I'm not active, and you've been bugging me about this. So I need to. That's just the one where you swipe, right? You just swipe on the movies, and you're like, "I saw this, I liked it."
I've seen this.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I texted you
I
last.
need to go update it.
I texted you last night about Letterboxd. I figured this is a great opportunity to bring it to the public's eye and really take
just
you to
publicly
task.
Shame him. I like it. That's really
exactly.
good.
Exactly. Yeah, Matt. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely,
if you do update it, I'm excited to see what you put down for Fabelmans. Again, kind of curious to see where this ends up. I want to know what everyone else thinks, like where this is going to fall in the Best Picture race. Is it a lock? Is it number one, or are we hyping it up? I don't know. I can't even really tell. I'm just so in this like bubble now. I was like, everything I say is right, but none of it's right. But yeah, let us know what you guys think about Fabelmans. What else you think it might get nominated for? We are on socials everywhere at 24 minutes of A24. Also, you can see all three of our beautiful faces right now on YouTube. So go subscribe and follow us there. Mm-hmm. I'm Ben Lawhorn.
And I am Ethan Simi. And as the legendary and immortal Tom Cruise says, see you at the movies.